Hi there. I want to speak a few words today about the abuser and validation. And this is under the Safe Relationship Training umbrella. And I want to speak today about one of the tools that can be used by an abusive individual or a very disrespectful individual. And one of those tools is the withholding of validation or giving of validation. So today I want to just highlight the fact that certain tools are used by the abuser. Sometimes these are done very consciously. Sometimes they've become so used to being able to treat people in a certain way that it's become habitual. It's become their way of life, if you will. And sometimes they have such a huge sense of entitlement that they feel entitled to treat people in a certain way, and are often unaware really of the extremely abusive dynamic, although sometimes they may not care anyway. Today I want to speak about validation and how that can be withheld, but also, interestingly enough, how that can be given as and when necessary. So one of the control tactics, if you will, that can be used by certain people is to actually withhold validation, to keep it away from the victim, so that the victim is rarely validated by the abuser at all. And the abuser has set themselves up sometimes to be the arbitrator of validation, or not, as the case may be, set themselves up to be the one to either validate the victim or to not, depending on what their motives are at that particular time. One of the motives for withholding validation is so that the abuser has control over the victim's feelings about themselves. And if the abuser were to keep pumping up the victim all the time, consistently, over a very long period of time, the victim would become empowered, and therefore they may start to think, oh, I don't like this at all, this abuse, when it does happen, and they may then want to leave. Whereas if someone is constantly undermining another person, then that person will potentially become very weakened over a long period of time and unable to make their own decisions, maybe even unable to make conscious decisions for themselves as far as their own welfare is concerned, because they may have handed over all their power to the abuser over a long period of time, to where they answer to the abuser as far as their actions are concerned, and almost need to ask the abuser for permission to do certain things. And therefore, their sense of validation is dependent a lot of the time on the abuser giving them the validation in their life, because they may have had their support network undermined to such an extent that that network has sort of dissolved over time and it's not there to support them anymore, and therefore they look to the abuser and rely on the abuser and become dependent on the abuser for all their needs at the end of the day, because the abuser may have whittled down the support network around the victim over time. And another way that validation or withholding of validation can happen is as far as the victim's sense of their own identity is concerned, and that can be invalidated as well over time. So over time they can be brainwashed into believing that they are worthless, that no one will want them, that they wouldn't be able to support themselves if they left, that only the abuser knows the truth of any situation, and then the victim becomes conditioned over time to only look to the abuser for affirmation, validation of the truth They may look to the abuser for their sense of identity, as it were, because their own sense of identity has been whittled away, has been undermined so much. So validation then can also be used intermittently in order to reward the victim. So it can be used in the reward and punishment system. So it's withheld as a form of punishment, if you will, if the victim isn't coming up to scratch, isn't doing what the abuser wants. And then it can be used as reward. So if the victim does something that is rewarding the abuser's agenda, they can be rewarded with validation, affirmation, compliments, built up for a very short period of time before they're brought down again. So validation can be withheld, but it can also be given intermittently as a way to reinforce the victim's previous view of the relationship as one that is loving and is working. If only she would do the right things at the right time, depending on what those things are according to the abuser anyway. So I just wanted to highlight that as a tool to have in your safe relationship training toolbox. And that is an awareness of the various types of tools that can be used by an abusive individual in order to keep the victim in line. So as always, stay safe and very happy. Bye-bye.